The Toyota Supra. We all know it and we all love it. For years it has been the car that everybody cites as to why Japan is the king of the streets. Its body lines are some of the best in the automotive world. So good in fact that many people think Ferrari themselves copied it. In the later generation, it came with an engine that today is seen as one of the best in the world. In the 8.6 video, I listed 3 cars as being on top of the podium for the Japanese domestic market. The GTR, RX-7, and now today, because of your votes, the Supra. The only question remains, Toyota Supra. What makes it so great? The Mark I Supra, well, doesn't really look like a Supra. That's to be expected though. It was the 1970s and almost all cars of this time period in both Europe and Japan looked the same. Our Supra here was based on the Celica chassis and was even just called the Celica in many locations. Suspension-wise, it actually shared a similar suspension setup to that of the A86, with 4-link rear end, MacPherson struts and stabilizing bar, and 4-wheel discs. Along with the normal Supra, we also got what was called the Celica XX. The highest power level 2800 GT Supra came with the 5M GEU inline 6, making 170 horsepower. Fun fact, the Celica XX was the first car on Earth to come with a navigational computer. The A40 chassis started us off in the 70s, but has now led us into the 80s. We've gotten quite the upgrade coming into this generation, but the Supra hasn't yet left home and gone fully independent. It was still based largely on the Celica chassis and known in Japan as the Celica XX rather than the Supra. This was also the generation where Toyota introduced 2 more models based on the Celica XX. A fastback style, which would come to be known as the Toyota Soarer, and a 4-door option that was known in Japan as the Chaser, but in the US we know it as the CRESTA. Toyota didn't mess around with the Supra. They threw everything they had at it. The suspension was co-designed by Lotus. The sound system was, well, insanely detailed. There was an option for leather seats, and finally, they went all out with the digital dash they crammed in there. Its highest output model was the later 85 and 86 years, coming with 160 horsepower out of the 5M GE engine. Outside of Japan, the output got a bump, making it 180 horsepower. Finally, the Supra has left its mother's basement and gone into the real world, gaining itself an independent chassis from that of the Celica. In the US, we got the 7M GTE, which was a fairly good turbo inline 6 producing 230 horsepower. In Japan, however, they got an engine that you may recognize, the 1JZ, making a respectable 280 horsepower. The A70 amassed a plethora of upgrades after splitting off from the Celica. The chassis was more focused on the rear-wheel drive platform, as the Celica had gone front-wheel drive. The suspension was upgraded. Although it wasn't designed by Lotus this time around, it did feature electronically controlled independent suspension. This time around, the Supra got a model known as the Type A that was a homologated version of their Group A touring car. It featured tons of upgrades to its handling and power characteristics. Surprisingly, it used the 7M GTE rather than the 1JZ and was pushing 270 horsepower. We'll focus on that more in the motorsports section. The Mark IV. This is of course the model that everybody knows. If you pull up next to one on the highway, expect to see nothing but its taillights in a moment or two. Now the Mark IV may appear on the surface to be a completely original car, but surprisingly, its styling was based on the much older 2000 GT, and then adopted into the much beloved rounded 90s styling we've all come to know. It had only 2 engine options wherever you bought it on Earth. The naturally aspirated 2JZ GE and the twin-turbo 2JZ GTE. In its highest power trim, it made 325 horsepower and 325 pound-feet of torque. The twin-turbo setup was a sequential setup rather than a parallel setup. This allowed it to keep low-end torque alongside its high-end power. If you'd like to know more about the difference between parallel and sequential turbo systems, go check out my comprehensive video about turbocharging. The A80 exploded in popularity because of its expert engineering making it as fast as possible. The chassis was designed from the ground up for speed and agility. Its aerodynamics are incredibly efficient and beautiful. Its suspension and braking was some of the best in the world at the time, and the 2JZ engine was over-engineered from the factory, leaving miles of headroom available for tuning. Many today know the Supra for its speed in a straight line, reeling in 8, 7, and even 6-second times out on the strip. The Mark III and Mark IV were used extensively by HKS and drag racing. Today, the world record quarter mile is held by the Enkanu Racing Supra with a 597 at 240 miles per hour. As a touring car, the Supra had a small history in Group A, but was unsuccessful as it had to compete in a heavier weight class. After the Mark III was decimated by the R32 GTR, Toyota decided to slow down their touring car racing endeavors. We saw in the AE86 video that the Corolla and Celica mainly represented Toyota in the rally side of motorsports, but the Celica Supra managed to squeeze in a few races. It won once in the Hong Kong Beijing Rally, competing in Group A. The Supra competed in many other divisions of racing in many different years. Here they are. That's weird. Not a lot of cars actually use the 2J for racing. Now, because of its rear-wheel drive layout, you can almost guarantee it's going to have a lot of market share in the drift community. And yes, it certainly does. Personally, I believe that the 2J deserves an entire video in and of itself. In fact, would you guys like to see videos styled like this but for specific engines? Let me know in the comments. The 2JZ is a living engine legend. It has been swapped into almost anything and everything, but it all started with the Supra. The 2JZ is a 3-liter inline 6-cylinder engine that in its most popular form made 320 horsepower out of its twin-turbo variant. But why is it such a good engine? First of all, it's popular, with Toyota using it in around 10 different cars, so the price isn't too expensive. Its OEM parts are almost always reliable, even when other mods have been applied to it, such as the timing belt. Because of its popularity, the aftermarket is massive and lets you build whatever you like with the engine. But the most important thing that makes the 2J so good is the fact that its lower end is a closed-deck iron block. Basically a solid block of iron with 4 holes drilled in it. They can make thousands of horsepower with a reliability that you would be hard-pressed to find in another engine. Although it did find a lot of use in motorsports, we kept seeing the 2.1-liter 4-cylinder being used. Otherwise known as the 4T GTE, it was a small 4-banger created to get Toyota's racing cars in smaller displacement divisions, while still producing large power outputs. In 2002, Toyota stopped all production of the Supra worldwide and its long-lived legendary life was over. Or was it? Ever since production ceased, the world has been begging Toyota to bring it back in one form or the other. In 2010, there was hope. Toyota had recently reapplied to trademark the name Supra and would need to use it in 3 years or less to keep the trademark. As we saw, they never used it. In 2014, Toyota announced another car known as the FT1, which to many looked like a perfect Supra replacement. But again, nothing came from the project. In March of 2018, Toyota finally showed us what we wanted to see. A car, actually produced by Toyota and BMW, and holding the Supra name. It supposedly features a turbocharged inline-6, dual-clutch transmission, and styling reminiscent of the old Supra, but with a modern twist. The Supra has weathered the test of time for more than 3 decades and could possibly be reborn to show the world what Toyota engineers can do for years to come. Toyota went through a dry spell in the 2000s of sporty cars, but are beginning to revive themselves with the semi-recent introduction of the GT86 and the brand new Supra. That concludes today's video. You guys have voted on the last 2 What Makes It So Great videos, so don't forget to vote on the top right hand corner for what car you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching.